The Xiu Chang Saga by user Hume Reddit. Rat in sheep's clothing. On the opposite side of the room was Furfag. Gaoian hadn't been kidding when she described him as large. Xiu had thought the locale were big. Ima had explained that Gaoians were relatively tiny compared to most sapient species, and by extension so were humans. But this species topped them by nearly a meter. He was a four-legged mountain of brown fur, straddling a chair which had smoothed itself out into a bench that held his mass without apparent strain. A pair of arms with three-fingered hands rested comfortably across his torso, as wide across as a queen-sized bed. He reminded Xiu of Snuffleupagus, for some reason. Though he lacked the elephant-like trunk, he had long, floppy ears and shaggy fur. His eyes were huge and blue, located closer to the sides of his head than a human's or Gaoian's. And Xiu remembered what Gaoian had said about his species being herbivores. He stood as she entered, but didn't approach her as she stared, wide-eyed. She noticed that he lacked fur along a strip on each of his sides, and the skin beneath glowed colors, turning a light blue as he looked at her. The large creature bobbed his head toward her. "Greetings, Miss Chang," he said in a deep, masculine voice, startling her. "I am Furfag. Pleased to meet you." She stared at him for long seconds, her jaw hanging open. "You speak English!" she finally blurted. He looked back at her, and the softly glowing lines along his sides pulsed. "No, you hear English," he said, and she heard the amusement in his voice. "That is the name of the principal language on your world, yes? The language of business, I believe you term it." Yes, but how?" He tapped the side of his overlarge head, and she realized she could see small tracings there under his fur. Cybernetics of some sort. "High-end language translation implant. It doesn't require pairing with an implant in the sapient you'd like to converse with. Very handy in my line of work." "What work is that?" "Fundamentally, I'm a diplomat, assigned here as part of the Interspecies Dominion's efforts to entice Gao into joining, not just provisionally, but as a full-standing member. Efforts that were very much on the cusp of success. Until, as it happens, this world gained a new member, one who was very much not Gaoian." At her confused look, his eyes flickered toward the closed doors. "I take it the Mother Supreme did not explain my reasons for wishing to meet you." Xiu laced her fingers together to keep them from fidgeting. No, she just said it was important." "Ah." That great shaggy head bobbed back and forth, and she assumed it was his equivalent of a nod. "Then, Miss Chang. Miss is the appropriate honorific, is it not? I'll explain it plainly. The government of Gao and its single colony have agreed to join the Dominion as a full voting member." He waved one arm, including the entire world in the gesture. "This agreement has been a long time in coming, and the negotiations have been some of the most challenging of my career. The Gaoians are very clever, and are not to be tricked. That cunning is why we seek them, and in return they'll gain a number of trade advantages as well as mutual defense agreements." "That sounds good," she said. "But where do I come in?" "Ah, the Gaoians have added one small, last-minute proviso to the agreement. Namely, that as part of the deal, the Dominion is either to supply Gao with the location of your homeworld and the right to deliver you there, or we are to transport you there ourselves. They've made it very clear that they aren't willing to negotiate on that point." Her heart flew. "Can you? Bring me home?" He hesitated. "No." Her hopes crashed back into the ground. What? But you said the Gaoians won't negotiate on that." "Yes, and likewise, I cannot negotiate either. Bringing you home is not within my power. So we are at an impasse, one only you can resolve." Her eyes began to burn. "But why? Why can't you take me home? You know where it is. The Courtine know where it is. If they can steal me on a lark, then why can't you bring me back?" "There has been an incident. Are you familiar with the species we call hunters?" Xiu hesitated, fighting back tears. Yes, there's been some mention of them. They sound like interstellar boogeymen. They attack without warning and kidnap people?" "They harvest people," he corrected grimly. "Though if the translator is processing boogeymen correctly, then yes, That is a good descriptor. They consume other sapient beings. We are all herd animals to them, and though we know little about them, we know that their entire society, from their social status to perhaps even their procreation, is dependent on their hunts. They strike without warning, and the more audacious the target, the more they seem to like it.
Xiu shuddered, thinking of a James Cameron movie. Then she realized. They attacked Earth? His head bobbed again.
Yes, near the same area where you were taken. In fact, we believe the hunters may have simply followed the energy traces of the ship that took you, but instead found the more tempting target of a well-populated, undefended world.
What happened?
It was a slaughter.
As her face paled, he held up a limb.
Of the hunters.
What? She said disbelievingly.
Oh yes, I've seen the footage myself. In fact, it seems to have somehow leaked out onto the interplanetary data network, he grumbled. And the strips along his sides tinted a pale red, which then turned a soft blue. A cluster of hunters, the most feared species currently extant in the galaxy, attacked a human sporting event. Hockey, I believe you call it. They assaulted with their heavy pulse guns. Your people replied with wooden sticks. When it was all done, there was not a single human fatality, and the hunters were smeared everywhere. Then the audience complained that the ice surface was ruined, and they couldn't continue the game. She could only stare.
Well, my people take hockey pretty seriously.
I'll keep that in mind. His flanks rippled blue, and the translator filled his tone with humor. But now I hope you see the problem. The humans now have irrefutable proof not just of alien life, but of the existence of a practical means of traveling the stars. And they know that some of the life among those stars is malicious. The eyes of your world are aimed upward now, and your people are likely fingering their weapons as they watch.
Then you need me. She held her hands toward him. I can talk to them for you. I can explain to them that the hunters aren't part of your society, that you don't mean any harm. Let me help. Her hopes were dashed again as his flanks rippled black and gray, and he shook his head.
I'm afraid it's too late for that.
The translator made his voice solemn. What? What does that mean? Her stomach had dropped to her feet and was currently congealing into lead in the vicinity of her toes. What have you done? She rasped. He held up a limb.
No one has been harmed, nor will they be, he explained. But your world has been placed under quarantine. An interdiction field has been installed, a force field surrounding your star system, preventing anything from entering or exiting.
What? Why? The translator made the sound of a sigh.
Because the galaxy is not ready for you.
Not ready for us? Or do you mean we're not ready for it? She hissed between her teeth, sounding like Myan when she was angry.
Either. Both. Look at your hands.
Xiu blinked at the non sequitur, but glanced down. Her hands had clenched into fists in her shock and anger.
The ignorant would look at us and assume that I am physically superior. Yet if I tried to strike you, I'd only end up hurting myself. In comparison, you could shatter my bones with little effort, and it would take weapons normally used against armored vehicles to harm you. Your people move faster, hit harder, and can take more damage than any species the galaxy has seen, including the boogeymen known as the Hunters. In some ways, you even think faster. Your neural pathways optimized for defense and attack. Then there's those organisms living inside you. If not for the corti suppressor in your neck, Gao might very well be a plague world already. He gestured helplessly. You, your people, are deadly in a way we've never seen before. And you come from a world where that deadliness was needed. The big alien leaned back in his seat, releasing another sigh. When this subject came up at the Galactic Council, I made a point of researching your species. I have seen much of your culture, your artistic and technological output, and it is amazing. You may be technologically inferior, But the competitiveness your world has forced into you has let you reach amazing highs and terrifying lows. It is those lows that ignite fear across the galaxy.
But we haven't done anything yet. You can't accuse us of being evil while you have the Kortai snatching people away and experimenting on them, others killing for a paycheck, and hunters eating people. Why are we worse than them?
You're not, but you could be. His voice was sorrowful. I'm very sorry. Had the Kortai left well enough alone, had the hunters not been so arrogant, the situation might have been very different by the time your people had developed faster than light travel naturally. But that isn't the situation we have.
She looked at him, too shocked to even form words. It wasn't until she realized that her flat stare was making him afraid that she looked down. So we're tried, convicted, and imprisoned forever for having potential. She was suddenly furious. Gao was right to think twice about joining you. She didn't know if his translator understood the Mandarin, but he flinched from her tone alone. She ignored him, the anger rushing out of her as quickly as it had come. She moved over to sit on a chair that rose out of the floor and sized itself for a Gaoian, its best guess at what she would need. She rested her elbows on her knees and hid her face in her hands. Furfag's mouth opened, but whatever he was going to say was interrupted by the door bursting open and Ima storming in, the Mother Supreme following at a more measured pace behind her. Xiu! You were shouting! What happened? The Gaoian mother glared at the big alien. Xiu startled, surprised to hear perfect English coming from Ima. Apparently, Furfag's translator worked for everyone in the vicinity. I could have been speaking properly to the people who'd taken me in, but they wouldn't even let me have that.
Furfag, when you had me invite Xiu here, you led me to believe that it would be to tell her something positive,
Gyamai said. She never raised her voice, but her disapproval was like a physical force, and even an alien 3 times her size quailed in the face of it.
Unfortunately not, but she deserved to hear it from me.
What? What did you tell her? Ima growled. They've walled off Earth, my homeworld, Xiu answered for him. Ima seemed surprised to hear Xiu sound perfectly intelligible, but wasn't to be distracted. What? How?
An experimental device. Essentially a system encompassing energy barrier,
Furfag clarified.
It was installed several cycles ago.
Even Gyamai seemed taken aback.
That is far more than a quarantine, Furfag. Such measures are ridiculous. When did the council decide on this?
He shook his head.
There was no debate. The action was taken unilaterally by the Govnaraga Vendragon Confederacy. The other members simply did not oppose.
Abomination,
Gyamai spit. The Mother Supreme was Xiu's own mother dialed up to 11, she decided.
Is this what you would have Gao participate in, Furfag? Would you have us nod our heads as you create more prison worlds? I told you the treaty would depend on helping Xiu.
Actually, I believe your exact words were that it would depend on Xiu, Mother Supreme. I reviewed the translator several times. I interpreted that to mean that the treaty was subject to her approval, regardless of anything else.
Xiu growled. You're not a diplomat. You're a lawyer.
Perhaps. The two only differ in scale.
You really expect me to advise them to join you? After what you've done?
Yes,
he stated, and his colors turned black, implacable. He took a step toward her, his need to convince her overcoming his natural fear of her as an unstoppable predator.
Neither one of us can do anything to help your homeworld for the moment. But you can help Gao. The predatory species of the galaxy see them as prey because they are unaligned. Once they join, attacking the Gaoians will be tantamount to attacking the Dominion, and even the Kortai will hesitate.
Pardon me if I don't see a whole lot of potential bravery in the Dominion. He bobbed his head, accepting the rebuke.
Perhaps. But anything is more than nothing, which is more than they have now.
You're trying to blackmail her, Ima snapped. Let's go. The air in here is bad.
Mother Ima,
Gyamai said. Her voice was calm, without a hint of censure, but Ima's muzzle snapped shut. The elder Gaoian turned to Xiu.
Xiu, what do you think we should do?
She stared back, wide-eyed. Me? What does it matter what I think? You're the Mother Supreme.
Yes, Gyamai replied calmly. And you're one of my sisters. We stand together, Xiu, like the clan of females always has.
Xiu glanced, near panic, at the 3 aliens who were all staring at her expectantly. Had they really just told her to decide the fate of an entire planet?
The choice is in your hands, Miss Chang,
Furfag said. Damn him. She wanted to tell him, Kao ni ma. Not that he'd understand it. He might not even have a mother. Ima was right. He was emotionally blackmailing her. She didn't owe him a damned thing, but she did owe the Gaoians. The only reason to say no would be to spite him. Spite him, and prove him right. You should join them, she said, nearly a whisper. Ima squeezed her shoulder and made a quiet keening noise. Xiu. Xiu glanced up toward Gyamai. You're still growing. Because you're not aligned with anyone, you're alone. And the court I feel brave enough to snatch your ships traveling between your own worlds because of it. She cast a hostile look over at Furfag. I don't know how much they can help. I don't think you can count on them at all. But if joining them makes the Kortai, or the Locale, or anyone think twice about hurting Myun or any other cub, it's what you should do.
This is not right for you,
Gyamai said. No, she replied. But it's right for Gao. Gyamai looked back at her, and she saw the grim resignation there. The Mother Supreme nodded.
Very well,
she said. She turned to the Govnorag of Endragon.
The clan of females of Gao will no longer oppose the acceptance of the treaty with the interspecies dominion, Furfag. We'll skip the normal diplomatic flowery prose and acknowledge that for all intents and purposes, the deal is done.
Furfag nodded, his flanks glowing a soft purple. But Gyamai wasn't finished.
Be aware, however. We will be using our newfound clout within the Dominion to address this miscarriage of justice. Be certain of that.
The glow of his flanks did not fade one bit.
Mother Supreme, I hope for it.
His head turned to Xiu, who sat on the nearby bench, her arms wrapped around her.
Thank you, Miss Chang. It is actions like what you have demonstrated here that will convince my brethren of the foolishness of their actions.
He turned to gather up his data tablet. Mr. Furfag? He looked back, meeting Xiu's gaze. Her eyes were red, but she didn't cry. That would happen later, once she was alone. Is it possible to send a signal to Earth? He hesitated, his colors turning a dark blue spotted with white.
The quarantine extends to communications.
She stared back at him. My family, they have no idea what happened to me. They don't even have the privilege of thinking I'm dead. He looked at her for a long moment, and she had no idea what the rainbow of colors running across his sides could mean.
I will make no promises, he finally said, but I'll see what I can do.
She nodded, knowing it was the best she could get. The big alien left, heading to the spaceport in the ship that would take him to his superiors. The good news stored on his tablet. With him gone, Xiu was back to needing to speak Gaori, and she expected she'd have to for a very long time. But for the moment, she didn't want to speak at all. Ima seemed to sense her need, her paw gently stroking her hair, petting her the way she would a distraught cub. The Mother Supreme was staring into space, looking thoughtful.
There are layers to this, I'm certain, she said after a moment.
She shook her head.
For the moment, you should both go home and rest. Find peace among the cubs. I will summon Officer Regari to take you home.
She turned to leave, but hesitated at the door, turning back to look at Xiu.
I wish you had fur, Xiu, because you'd make an excellent mother.
Then she was gone, her attendants scurrying along behind her. Xiu followed Ima to the landing pad as if sleepwalking, and during the shuttle ride back to the commune, she didn't bother asking about the patterns in the landscape. When they arrived, it was just before the midday meal, and the cubs were getting out their morning lessons. Myun had obviously seen the shuttle approaching, so she dashed straight from her lessons to the landing pad, waiting at the edge as they touched down. She began to dart forward as Xiu stepped out, but hesitated at the look on the human's face. Myun? The furry little alien girl blinked at her. I think I could use a hug. What you're asking for is difficult.
Oh, really? Don't tell me you're so easily defeated by planet-bound primitives.
There's no reason to be insulting. Unlike most of my brethren, I am capable of respect, and these primitives you mention are worthy of it. Their networks are well built and defended. most likely due to their adversarial nature. It's like they launch network attacks against each other for the fun of it.
I'm not asking you to cause damage or exfiltrate any data. I just need you to deliver a message.
And you want that message to be targeted rather than wide cast, which is the problem. I need to isolate the appropriate node, and that requires persistent intrusion and reconnaissance.
So you can't do it.
What did I just say about insulting me? I swear it's like talking to a wall, except the wall sounds more intelligent.
There's the Kortai I came to see.
Wei Chang, yes, Wei online, sat staring at his computer screen. Beside him, a warm summer breeze blew in through his open window, carrying with it the noises and smells of the nighttime Vancouver suburbs. It was late. He was supposed to be in bed. Summer vacation was almost over, and school would be starting soon. Grade 12, his last year of high school. His mother made noises about getting to bed at the proper time, but the fire was lacking in it. A year before, she would have marched into his room and ripped the power bar from the wall, whether he was in a match or not, and refused to return it until the next morning, cursing at him in Mandarin the whole time. Now, all she would do is poke her head in through his door, remind him it was time for bed in a flat voice, and then go sit in the living room, where she would watch the news without really seeing it. Xiu had been missing for 9 months. She'd gone to a late class and never returned, and none of her friends had heard a word from her. They'd filed the missing person report almost immediately, but it was difficult to get the police to take it seriously. Yes, we're sure she left the class. No, she doesn't have a boyfriend. Yes, we've called all her friends. Wei had scoured the university campus for her while his frantic father drove around in their car, and his mother fretted by the telephone at home. No one in the family slept that night, and the next day the police took the matter more seriously. He remembered the cops talking quietly where they thought he couldn't hear, speculating on what could have happened to an attractive young woman walking home at night, and his stomach tied itself into knots at the possibilities offered. By the second day, Xiu's face was on the news, and the Chang family could do nothing but wait. But his father was always out, always searching. Days turned to weeks, turned to months, and hope died bit by bit. But his father was always out, always searching. Dad eventually had to return to work, because like it or not the bills had to get paid, and he couldn't neglect what remained of his family. Every night, however, he would drive around Vancouver for an hour, searching against hope. Wei's mother never yelled anymore, not even when he'd deliberately do things to piss her off, wanting her to snap and rage at him. She never did. Deep inside her, the idea that Xiu had run away to escape her nagging and control was taking root and festering. Wei had no comforting words to offer. He knew his sister wasn't the type to run away, but he really, really wished she had, because the other explanations were so much worse. Then came the day the Rogers Arena was attacked by aliens, and Xiu Chang was completely forgotten, no matter how much his mother shrieked at the RCMP officers, and as much as Wei wanted to get angry, he couldn't blame them. The Earth being attacked by aliens was a big thing, if it could be called an attack, and not a joke. Wei didn't know what to make of it. Aliens were supposed to be strong and tough and take an army led by Will Smith or Sigourney Weaver to take down, not get their heads caved in by a bunch of guys with hockey sticks led by Henrik Saden. If there hadn't been so many witnesses who'd personally seen and gotten hit by the energy weapons, it could have been passed off as a lame publicity stunt. He was as interested as anyone else, but not just because he fought digital aliens 3 hours a day, or because, hey, energy guns are awesome, but because he was sure those aliens were connected somehow to Xiu's disappearance. He felt it in his gut. The first thing he'd done after seeing the news was hop on the internet. It was rough going. Any website that even mentioned aliens was getting bombed by the curious and the panicked. But eventually he managed to find what he was looking for. A site that listed UFO sightings across the world. Fringe sites. Not the kind of sites the RCMP would even think of when investigating missing persons. From those sites, he learned that there had been UFO sightings in Vancouver the night Xiu had gone missing. Multiple sightings. Wei realized that up until that moment, even he had given up hope. An alien attack had given him hope. Now he had to figure out what to do with it. Had the aliens kidnapped some humans to try and figure out how tough they were before attacking? If so, they needed to fire their scientist guy because he really dropped the ball. The aliens had landed in some kind of pods, which didn't seem suited for interstellar use, no matter how fast they might travel. So had they been launched from some kind of mothership? If so, was Xiu trapped on that ship right now? Wei was terrified that his sister was locked in a cage, being experimented on. Or worse. The one thing that helped keep some of the nightmares at bay was the pathetic performance of the aliens during the attack. Xiu was a shrimp, but she was in good shape and took her kung fu very seriously. She could hit pretty hard. Not that he'd ever admit that to her face. But if she was on an alien ship, what could he do? NATO had taken everything associated with the aliens and everyone knew it. The media were making as much of a nuisance of themselves as they could, and one Canadian teenager couldn't add much. Wei haunted online forums as much as he could, trying to contact people who claimed to have been abducted before, people who suddenly had a lot more credibility. But even they, assuming he was talking to the real deal and not more kooks, had little they could offer him. Now the new focus of the world was the darkening. Astronomers everywhere had noticed that every object in the sky beyond Uranus, every object, had dimmed, just a little bit, every object, all at once. Wars and rivalries across the entire planet had come to a screeching halt as humanity realized that, somewhere up above them, alien assholes were doing something, and humans probably weren't going to like whatever it was. Wei followed the discussions on the forums with interest. Even the people who seemed to be the real deal when it came to knowing about aliens had no idea what was going on. His screen was sitting on one of those forums when it happened. A window popped open on his computer. He growled, thinking an ad had somehow dodged his pop-up blocker. Fringe websites had to use some pretty shady ad networks. He'd almost closed it before the content of the gray box sunk in, and his jaw dropped as he read the words. Your sister is safe. She was taken, but not by the creatures that attacked your city. She was taken, but she escaped and is among friends. Xiu is safe. Below was a picture of his sister, wearing some kind of weird red clothing, like overalls crossed with robes. The picture was from an upward angle, and her head was turned to the side, and she was speaking and gesturing angrily, but she was unhurt and gloriously alive. Wei stared at the screen for long seconds. Then he jumped to his feet, not giving a damn that his legs hit the desk and sent his mouse flying. Mom! Mom! Kualai! All right, everybody, that concludes the second part of Rat in Sheep's Clothing by user Hume Reddit here. Thank you guys so much for listening, and as always, if you liked it, please go ahead and give it a like, and if you are new to the channel, please subscribe so that you can get notifications every time I post a video. It's probably going to be at least one a day here for the foreseeable future, so thank you so much, guys, and if you would like to stop by my Patreon and support the channel, that would be fantastic. By no means is that, absolutely necessary, but I appreciate every little bit of support that I get. Thank you guys so much for listening. Have a good one. I'll see you next time.